Name, Richard Wong, former owner of the Golden Dragon Takeout. Date, October 18th, 2021. Time, 11:40 a.m. Location, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The first time Jeffrey Dahmer came to my Chinese restaurant in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I did not pay him any heed. In my eyes, he was just another customer, but unlike many others, he was clearly a quiet and lonely one. His presence soon became expected as his visits frequented. Every Friday night, without fail, he would come into my small restaurant on the 49th Street in Milwaukee, the Golden Dragon Takeout. And every Friday, he would order the exact same thing: General Tso's chicken, pork fried rice, and a side of spring rolls. We only had a few staff members, and by the third or fourth time he visited, we all knew his face and his order by heart. We also noticed how he never ate at the restaurant but only got takeout, and how he was always alone. He never ordered for two or changed any dishes in his order, and he liked his food prepared a certain way only, low in spice. But in those first few months, nothing about him was peculiar. It was not exactly uncommon for regulars to have their go-to orders or comfort food options, but something in his manner did begin to unsettle me after a few months. I wish I could have understood it better to put a pin on it, but it was simply something about his attitude and personality which did not feel right. He avoided eye contact at all costs, and I never saw him smile even once. He was not particularly rude to anyone, but was still extremely reserved. He barely spoke beyond what was necessary and never laughed at any of the jokes I made or never answered any friendly questions. But what struck me the most was how he always seemed anxious. It almost made me feel as if he wanted to be anywhere but in my restaurant, but perhaps that was just his personality. Another thing which bothered me about him was how he always kept his face down, as if he was trying to hide from someone. He did not usually wear a cap, but on the days that he did, he kept his cap low in order to hide his face even more. What was also striking was how his routine never changed. He would walk in every Friday between 9:30 and 10 p.m., order his food with as little conversation as possible, pay his amount in cash, and leave within seconds of receiving his order. Most regulars ended up making friends with the waitstaff or the cooks, but not Jeffrey Dahmer. He strictly stayed to himself. At first I chalked it up to social awkwardness, but as months went by, there were other small things that just started to feel off. I do not know why I began to take a particular interest in just this one customer, but I believe it was simply my sixth sense ticking. I needed to know more. I was always there when he came in, and I waited for the day he would come in with a friend, but he never did. He never even took a phone call while waiting for his food, even when his phone kept ringing unstoppably. He never dined in either. To most people this might not seem rather strange, but I had run the restaurant for over 15 years, and I have seen how even the most reserved customers occasionally sat down to eat, or took a call while waiting, or brought a friend or significant other with them once in a while. If none of this, they at least made occasional small talk about the weather or soccer or the country's politics, but he never did that. One such Friday, when I had already known Jeffrey Dahmer for several months, around the middle of October in 1990, something even more unusual happened. When he came in, he appeared even more agitated than he usually was and seemed to be in a hurry. He was wearing a hat which obscured his face partially, but all of us at the restaurant easily recognized him. As soon as he ordered, he began to look restless, as if he once again could not wait to get out of there. I kept surveying him from the side of my eye, unsure of what might be wrong with him, but I knew it was pointless to ask. He was not the kind of man who would open up about his troubles. Moreover, I hardly knew anything about the man anyway. He was in such hurry that he picked up his food and came forward to pay me, but turned around and left without taking his change with him. He quickly walked away, the couple of dollar bills sitting on the counter left behind. I had no desire to cheat the man of his hard-earned money, so I quickly grabbed the change and rushed outside, running after him. I called his name, but he was already by his car, my voice unable to reach him, so I quickened my pace. His car was an old, beige-colored 1978 Chevrolet Malibu and was parked just a few feet from the entrance. As I walked closer, I immediately noticed something extremely weird. The back seat of his car was piled with large black trash bags, all of them sitting beside one another. I could not help but glance at them, especially because they looked heavy and misshaped, as if there was something more than just trash inside them. I could not help but wonder why the man would be carrying trash bags in his car, but everything about him was just as strange as the bags. The moment I got closer to the car, an overwhelming stench filled my nose as if something rotten and metallic was inside. It was impossible to keep breathing around that ugly scent, but as I inhaled it in, I immediately recognized what it was. It was the sickly, sweet, pungent smell of decaying meat. I had worked in the food business for a very long time to be wrong about something like this, which was why the bags perturbed me even more. My mind raced as I wondered what could be inside them, but the man before me was not one to answer questions, especially questions that concerned him. I called out his name again, and he turned around sharply, clearly startled by my presence. I could see he had not been expecting me to run after him. He kept the food in his passenger seat and turned around fully. I immediately noticed how his usually lifeless expression flickered into something akin to panic. He was worried about something. Without another word, I held out his change for him as a way of explanation, and he quickly took it from my hand, mumbling a brief thank you before getting into the car. I stayed there watching him as he pulled away faster than usual, his panic evident even in his driving. As he left, the rotting smell went with him, but I continued to stand there for a long time, staring at the spot where his car had been. My senses were still clinging onto the awful smell, making me wonder what kind of meat was decaying inside those bags. It definitely felt wrong, but a Chinese man in an American neighborhood could not go around making accusations. So I stayed quiet. But after that night, I just could not stop thinking about Jeffrey Dahmer. I knew something was very wrong with him to the extent that he was dark. I wanted to explore further about it, but I had no means to do it. He did live somewhere in the neighborhood, but I did not have his address or phone number, and I was scared about my suspicions being completely wrong as well. I did not want to lose a regular customer just because I could not stop making stories about him in my head, and that could quickly become hazardous for my reputation, and the reputation of my restaurant as well. I had to be careful, no matter how much Jeffrey Dahmer's presence unsettled me. He continued coming every Friday, even after that, as if nothing had been wrong, and I was forced to ignore the voices in my head. But one day, something strange happened. I was sitting at the counter when he came to collect his order at his usual time, and that was exactly when Jason Liu's shift was over. Jason was our 18-year-old delivery boy and was definitely a troubled kid. His parents had died in a car accident when he was only 9, and he had never been able to adjust to their death. He was forced to go from foster home to foster home because of his behavior and discipline issues. But now that he was 18, he had just gotten quiet. He was also friendly, good-looking, and definitely street-smart. I always liked the kid. He had run away a couple times in the past to explore different other options perhaps, but he always came back whenever he needed money. I gave him a job as a delivery boy because I knew no one else was going to do it, and I did not want the poor boy to fall into bad habits. He already had a difficult life, and if I could play some part in making his future easier, I was going to do it. He was definitely not perfect, but he was hard-working, never missed a day, and never complained either. He was always happy with the money he got and was charming enough to score tips from our customers. The arrangement worked for both of us, and I had a young, smart delivery boy for my restaurant. That day, as I was sitting and Jeffrey Dahmer was waiting for his food, I noticed how Dahmer struck up a conversation with Jason the moment Jason was free from work. It was miraculous because Dahmer had never talked to any of the restaurant staff, and I had never seen the man talk or laugh. From what I could see, the two of them were absorbed in conversation, both of them laughing as if they were old friends. But there was clearly some difference between their ages, so it was not exactly possible. I do not know how it started or who started it, but the conversations did not stop there. Every Friday I would see Jason and Dahmer having a conversation while Jason waited for his food. The talk was never for too long, perhaps just 5 minutes at a time each Friday, but the way they were comfortable in each other's presence seemed as if they were meeting outside of the restaurant as well. Jason never mentioned anything about it, and I did not feel right in asking. I had no desire to invade in Jason's personal life, no matter how much Jeffrey Dahmer unsettled me. But that did not mean I was not worried. It just struck to me as strange how the antisocial Dahmer who had never talked to anyone would suddenly begin talking to Jason out of the blue. Something about the whole thing just felt wrong, but I had no way of confirming my suspicions. I did try to hear their conversations quite a lot of times, but they were only talking about TV shows, motorbikes, cars, or random things which could only interest two boys. From where I was standing, it just seemed like a normal friendship between two men, and I had no solid reasons to doubt it. Dahmer was still just as reserved with everyone else at the restaurant, and I quickly dismissed that. At least he was talking to one person. Jason, too, seemed completely normal despite the whole thing. He was still regular, and working just as hard, and he still never missed a day from work. I was glad that I had not tried to investigate anything regarding Jeffrey Dahmer any further, because now that he was Jason's friend, he suddenly began to seem much more normal than he did before. The cooks and other waitstaff at the restaurant said so as well, because earlier everyone just referred to him as a lifeless robot. But now it seemed as if he was just shy and socially awkward, and something about Jason must have made him comfortable enough to open up. My suspicions about him began to reduce with time. In fact, I was ecstatic when Jeffrey Dahmer started picking up food from the restaurant every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday instead of just doing Fridays. I did wonder if he was coming only to see Jason, but at least my business was growing. His order and timing remained the same, which made sense because Jason's shift ended at that time every day as well. But despite all these telltale signs, I stopped doubting Dahmer. Jason was an adult and capable of making his own decisions, and if he enjoyed Jeffrey Dahmer's company, so I was no one to object or judge him for his choices. It seemed as if Dahmer was no longer suspicious in my head. One night, on March 22, 1991, I got a call on the restaurant's landline, which was reserved specifically for delivery orders. I was surprised to hear a very familiar voice from the other side. It was Jeffrey Dahmer. He ordered his food on the phone and asked if it could be delivered to his house instead of him picking it up. In all this time, this was the first time he had called for delivery, and even though it did strike me as strange, I shrugged it off. He might be sick or tired, and would not have wanted to venture out of his house just to pick up a meal. I do not know why I hesitated momentarily, but in the end I agreed to it. Jason was already heading out with several orders, so it made things even easier. Dahmer had called at 8 p.m., which was much earlier than his usual pickup time, and Jason's shift was still ongoing. I watched for any surprise on Jason's face for Jeffrey Dahmer's order, but he seemed completely nonchalant about it. I watched him load everything in the delivery box at the back of his bike and head out for the deliveries. That was the last time I ever saw Jason. The landline phone of the restaurant began to ring non-stop after that, all of the calls coming from customers whose orders were supposed to be delivered by Jason. I was initially surprised because 1 hour had already gone by and Jason should have already been done with the deliveries in that duration, but it seemed as if he had gone somewhere else. I got worried but did not know what to do. When Jason did not come back even after a few more hours had gone by, I knew something must have been terribly wrong. I took my car and some other members from the restaurant and we scoured the roads for Jason or his bike. My guess was he might have gotten into an accident, but it did not seem to be the case. We asked in the hospital as well, but no accidents had been reported for the night. It was as if Jason had magically disappeared in thin air. I immediately assumed that he might have just gone off on one of his usual disappearances, since it would not be the first time. But he had never disappeared in this manner. He was still in his delivery uniform, with no luggage or money or any of his belongings. It did not make sense for him to disappear in this manner. I even went around to the apartment he shared with another boy, and he informed me that Jason had not even returned home. Midnight had already passed by and something just felt wrong. That was when I started making calls around town, but it seemed as if no one had seen him. He had not gone home, and he had not returned to the restaurant either, and the bike he used for deliveries was also missing. Despite the panic in my chest, I waited at the restaurant all night for Jason, hoping he would come back. But he didn't. As soon as morning arrived, I went to the local police station to file a missing persons report. They already had most of his records, but I still told them everything I knew about Jason, including what he was wearing the night of the disappearance, how he looked, the details of his bike, and all of his last known delivery addresses, including Jeffrey Dahmer's on North 25th Street, Jason had not delivered a single order that night, and when I surveyed the route for deliveries, I could see that Dahmer's house would have come first. It meant Jason would have gone there for his first delivery, or perhaps he had disappeared even before that. The suspicions I had towards Dahmer once again took root in my head, and I could once again smell the decaying meat I had smelled from the trash bags in his car. A part of my head kept telling me that he was behind Jason's disappearance, but I did not know if it would be right to bring these suspicions towards the police. But I decided to tell them anyway. I should have already known how dismissive they would be of the case because Jason was just an orphan. He was a troubled teenager with no family and no friends to fight for him or someone who could force the police to find him. To the police, he was just another runaway who would come back whenever he pleased. The case was even weaker because Jason had pulled such acts in the past as well, and police had reports for every single one of them. I had nothing I could use to make sure the police looked into Dahmer because the moment I mentioned him, they stopped listening completely. I still remember what one of the officers said. "You mean Jeff? The guy's harmless," the officer claimed, and they told me how he was friendly even when he kept mostly to himself. I tried to tell them how it was the first time Jeffrey Dahmer had ordered his food to be delivered to his house, and that very night Jason had disappeared. I could see how they all thought I was just a crazy lunatic, making impossible connections. I tried my best to reason with them to at least look into Dahmer, but they refused, outright saying that the time they waste in checking Jeffrey Dahmer could be used to find out where Jason might be. I kept insisting how Jason had gone to Dahmer's place the night of his disappearance, Dahmer's house being the first on the route, but they shrugged that off as well. They claimed how we had no proof if Jason even went there, and it would be wrong to pester an innocent civilian regarding the running away of a teenage delivery boy with a history of sudden disappearances. It was nothing out of the norm for them. They were sure how Jason must have taken off again since this was not his first time, and I knew I was not going to reach anywhere with them. They were never going to listen. But I could feel that something was wrong even when no one believed me. I only voiced out my theories to the police, not wanting to gain any more attention by accusing Dahmer in front of the townspeople as well. I was certain everyone was going to be on Dahmer's side, and Jason would just be this unruly kid who never had any grip on himself. There was nothing more I could do. Months passed and nothing was found about Jason. Usually when Jason had disappeared in the past, he returned within a month or so, but he had never been gone for so long. I continued to call the police religiously and kept asking questions, but there was nothing. They had no leads, no updates, and no body either. Dahmer stopped coming to the restaurant altogether, which made things even more suspicious for me. When more than a couple months passed, I had to accept the worst, that Jason was never coming back. This time his disappearance was not just a temporary act, but something permanent. I had to accept it, even if the thought pained me, because I truly did care for that kid. Then on July 22, 1991, the news broke that Jeffrey Dahmer had been arrested. As I saw the case unfold before my eyes, I realized how the details were far worse than what I could have ever imagined. I saw it all on television: the bodies, the photographs, the freezer, the acid barrels. The news said he had murdered at least 17 men and boys, but I had the feeling the number was much, much higher than that. The bodies which were found in his house were of young boys, many of them vulnerable just like Jason was. Their identities revealed that they were teenagers, runaways, orphans, drifters, mostly young men who would not be missed by anyone if they just disappeared one day. That was when I knew for sure that I had been right all along. Jason was definitely one of them. It all made sense to me. Dahmer must have first seen Jason as the restaurant and would have found out about him through people in the town. He must have been grooming Jason and testing the waters. I had seen how their conversations had lengthened and how Jason seemed more and more comfortable around Dahmer with every visit. Dahmer had clearly gained Jason's trust little by little, and the moment Jason delivered food to his apartment, Dahmer must have seen his chance, or he had probably planned it all in this way on purpose, which was why he had ordered food that night instead of picking it up himself. When the police released the full list of victims, Jason's name was not on it. But I knew that meant nothing. He had acid barrels to dissolve bodies, and I can never forget the trash bags filled with decaying meat. Now I know it was human meat. It was clear he occasionally disposed bodies as well, and Jason could have been one of those bodies. Dahmer only admitted to killing at least 17 boys, but that could very well just be a lie. Moreover, he could not remember all their names, saying he did not keep records of everyone, and some victims were never identified. Jason was not important to anyone in the world, but me, since he had no family, and he turned into another missing person in the police system who no one cared about. It has been 30 years to the tragedy, but I still find myself thinking about that day. I think about the trash bags and the last night I saw Jason, and how I felt as if something was wrong. I wish I had tried harder to find out more about Jeffrey Dahmer when I first suspected him, rather than simply staying quiet and going about my day. Perhaps that might have saved Jason, and he would have been alive today. I should have also forced the police to do more when Jason had disappeared, or I should have investigated Dahmer myself. I am glad Dahmer was arrested and put in jail, but I will still feel as if Jason never got the justice he deserved. He should have never been one of Dahmer's victims. None of those boys deserved it. And it will be my biggest regret till my dying day that I did not try harder.